Well, g'day guys. Welcome to the Reach Australia podcast. Today I'm talking with Rory Shiner, Mikey Lynch and Phil Colgan about disruption. Guys, can you just introduce yourself for those who don't know you? Rory?
So Rory over here in Perth, where I am the senior pastor of Providence Church.
Mikey?
I'm one of the founding directors for Geneva Push and the whole Reach Australia thing, and lead the AFES team here in Hobart, Tasmania.
And Phil?
Phil Colgan, Senior Minister of St George North Anglican Church in the sort of inner southern suburbs of Sydney, and part of the Reach Australia movement.
Now, we've all been feeling the disruption from COVID-19. It's impacted our lives in our homes. It's also impacted our churches and our ministries as well in a significant way. In some senses, it might be too early to start, waxing lyrical about what are the long-term range impacts. But I thought it was important to catch up with each of you guys to start thinking into what are the opportunities that disruption brings. So, Rory, kicking off with you, how have you been thinking about it at a local church level in Perth?
Yeah, we've been thinking about it just to spin out a bit of an analogy. If you know the Mary Kondo stuff that was popular 6 months ago, 12 months ago, whatever, where she's a interior designer and her encouragement is to declutter and kind of a minimalist. And she has this whole kind of elaborate thing where you get everything out of the house and you hold every item and you ask the question, does this bring me joy? And that's the criteria by which it stays or which it goes. So it's kind of this ruthless decluttering exercise. And I think there's a bit of an analogy there where the pandemic has meant that life as normal ceased. And what we're trying to do, I just came off a town hall meeting last night on Zoom over here, and we've tried to think, given that everything was wiped off the table, what we want to kind of, metaphorically hold each item and ask the question, is this something that we need? What does this do? Does this program, ministry, church service or small group, does it, what's it here for? What does it do? Does it do the thing?
Does it bring me joy?
That's right. If it doesn't bring us joy, it's out. Maybe joy's the wrong thing, although it's probably not a bad...
John Piper would love it, wouldn't he?
Absolutely. That would be how Piper would run this thing. So I think there's an opportunity there. And I think it's important actually to not only to do that, but to lead your congregation and your leadership team through thinking that with you. Because otherwise it's kind of, the potential is that you've got this sort of, night of the long knives. Everyone's terrified waking up to find out whether their program got cut or their favourite thing got axed or whatever. And you feel like when Murdoch took over the papers in Britain in the 1980s, there were all these guys with Australian accents going around with clipboards cancelling all the free lunches and everything.
We're already, in a sense, we're on a trajectory one way or the other, aren't we? Because some of us have led by saying, we'll preserve as much as we can in this online thing, but it's the same. And if we've done that, and I've seen that even in the AFES world, it's mid-year conference, it's just online. And I understand that approach, and there's truth to that. But that sets you on a trajectory that's much more preserve. Whereas if we've actually led people going, it is a disruption, we are grieving, it is different, it's not the same. In some ways it's good, in some ways it's not. That sets you on a trajectory that is already helping people be receptive to what you're talking about. Do you know what I mean? It's like, okay, look, this is different. And it's a bit harder if we haven't done that. And I guess it's still not too late though, is it? It's still not too late to say, hey, you know what? You know how we said things are the same? But they haven't been completely, have they? Let's admit that. And you can then start to actually help people do a bit of even short-term discovery, can't you?
So
absolutely.
There's a real opportunity to start thinking intentionally into ministry. Hopefully you were doing this beforehand, but my sense is there's a lot of ministries that weren't. They just inherited what they did the last 12 months and they just did it again and probably added a few more things. How have you been using this time, Phil, to think intentionally about St George North Anglican Church and what you've been doing?
Yeah, well, I mean, from the very beginning at our staff meetings or our leaders meetings or anything like that, we've been trying to put on our agenda, even if we never discussed it, have as a discussion item, an item on the agenda are there things we've always wanted to do that we would want to start up out of this? So we just got them there, sitting there, percolating and thinking about it. And are there things we don't want to do that we used to do when we come out of this?
And I think related to that, that's really great, Phil, because I saw something, I think it was Greg Lee talking about, maybe on Dominic Steele's thing, about a lot of time pastorally reflecting with team, but you're introducing another thing, which is, in a sense, our staff meetings, I assume for all of us, have been a bit fuzzier and a bit softer than normal. But it's not just pastoral, but it's also what you're describing, which is like a blue sky thinking, which it doesn't necessarily come out with a to-do list, but it's just this week, here's the things Phil's been pondering this week that he doesn't have an answer to. And by the end of the staff meeting, we still don't have an answer to. Am I right in describing that?
Yeah, no, that's right. But they're percolating away. So it's interesting how our agendas have changed for staffing. We've got this action list, and then we've just had this dreaming.
Yeah, exactly.
At the bottom, which often we've not even got to discussing.
And that's another way of caring for people too. Hey, if it's just how's everybody feeling, how you doing, how's the kids at home, and we're not also going, this is because we're leading a team who part of their well-being is serving the kingdom of God, and to lead them in an open-ended uncertainty is part of how we lead, isn't it?
Yeah. So for us, they're small things, because I think we've been intentional about our ministries. I don't think there is a ministry where we think, oh, here's the opportunity to put the knife into it, like Rupert Murdoch's. We've seen more positive opportunities, So give an example. A couple of our congregations, as they've grown, we've struggled to move from just organic welcoming to a structured welcoming, and so forth. So from the very beginning, we said, well, when we come out of this, we want a welcoming team up and running in that congregation, ready to go. That's a small example. But then there's others that have come out of this where we've realised, actually, we're doing all right at this video stuff and this web stuff, which wasn't ever really our cup of tea before. I mean, I'm still back in 1600s sort of ministry is my natural world. But when suddenly we realised, hang on, this stuff we've done for the web, we're a multi-congregation, multi-location congregation. Now we can, instead of having an interview that just edifies that congregation, we video it and we can show it to everyone like we've been doing online. But now, why can't we do that? Just little new ideas flowing out of it. But I think that's different if you're in a church, though, where perhaps you haven't had the opportunity to be thinking intentionally, or the people are not as on board. And I think the Rupert Murdoch analogy is a good one. Some of the language I've been hearing is, what an opportunity, as if, walk around with your gun, putting the bullets into and come out with this great new church that's just how you want it to be in your image. Yeah, I would hope that yes, there are opportunities potentially to say, we're not going to come out keeping doing that ministry we used to do. We shut it down and now let's not start again. But I would hope that'll be done with consultative pastoral leadership that actually says there's a reason we're not starting it again, because we want to focus on children's and youth or instead, or whatever it is,
Yeah. There's often a leadership bias in that, where my observation is not universally, but on average, leaders are more change tolerant than the standard distribution of any group of people. And so I remember hopefully no one's listening to this personal recollection, but in the early phases of the pandemic, I was on our Slack channel. I was like going hyper, just writing all these things, saying we could change this and we could do this and we could do that. And my executive guy, the guy that runs our day-to-day operations and staff team, had to call me aside and say, we just got to put a moratorium on all these new ideas, because there's a pastoral moment going on as well here. And to only seize it as an opportunity was to just have a bit of a tin ear to the way most people experience things. And even if you do see an opportunity for change, and leaders should always be looking for improvement and change and so on, you do want to be able to say, and sometimes it's important to lead with, to say, what do we want to never let go of here? What are the things that are precious to us? And I think in a well structured ministry, that those will tend to be more down the principle end, that we never want to let go of, Jesus, God, the Holy Spirit, and the Bible. maybe some things like, the centrality of Bible teaching and the a discipleship-driven ministry and so on. And it's very important and completely reasonable for people to hear that you're not just doing this actual total root and branch, destruction of everything they hold precious. I think that then buys you the kind of the trust capital to be able to say, actually, that thing, some things that people do, some structures that people hold precious that need to be weaned off. Other things where I think people, a lot of times, if you've got aspects of the ministry that you think aren't achieving what you want them to achieve or whatever, often even the people in them, sometimes the reason it keeps going is because they do want to save face, that there's no non-embarrassing way to stop that thing.
Yeah.
And to be able to stop it in this kind of moment and to celebrate what the good was and stuff, that's all part of the...
and that's where we have this great opportunity, right? Because we've got... it's very difficult to skillfully, consultatively, in a process of change and helping people realise the urgency and the issues and imagine what could be and pull together the coalition of people who agree and whatever. So hard normally, right? But and because you're fighting the forces of conservatism, which partly are doing what we're already doing is less risky than anything else. So that's false assessment of risk, that doing the same thing is never dangerous when it often is, as well as this honest shame saving face thing you just described. To stop doing what I'm doing is to admit that I've been doing the wrong thing for such a long time. But now we've got this opportunity, if we go slow enough in the right way and talk carefully enough, conservatism's flipped. Because now, what's the same thing? Well, it's this not much at all. And so actually to go, doing not much at all is the least risky thing. Starting new things or restarting old things is risky. And suddenly none of us is doing anything. So there's no shame lost by not doing anything. And so it would be a mistake to flip back, to accord the conservative credibility to February 2020, and to accord what we're doing to be what we were doing in February or November 2019. Instead we want to subtly, in the way we talk and think, go, I'm thinking not so much of you guys as churches, as the church that you've inherited a lot of kind of clutter, that to just say, this is who we are now and we're this now. Isn't it wonderful what we're doing now? And then when you introduce your first service, maybe you don't go, perhaps, full worship service with all that entails, but you say, let's meet together and I'll give a devotion. And by the fact that you've now kind of, in a sense, created a missionary chapel service rather than church, you can slowly start to fold out a different pattern, and then within that different pattern, slowly you go, you know what, this missionary chapel thing we're doing occasionally, maybe we should more be formalizing this and start really recognizing this is a kind of church we're doing, and suddenly you're building, you're conservatively, slowly, risk aversely building something new. It's a great opportunity to take people, if you can lead people that way, by sort of severing and dissolving the assumption that normal and safe is, you don't need to even argue against it. You just need to just slowly.
So, can I ask you a question, Mikey? Then are you more struck by the similarities or differences? So you're in, what I might think of as a mission organization, as a sometimes called parachurch or whatever. And I don't know, does that, there's this inherent conservatism in churches that everyone knows that there's a weekly service on a Sunday that has certain core expectations, whereas almost everything you do is surplus to requirements in people's minds, that the Bible, there's no, everything a mission organization like yours does is in addition to the baseline expectation. So do you feel like you're fighting similar forces, or do you have that same sense of clutter, or is yours a completely decluttered scenario? What are the differences?
Look, on one level, leading ministry amongst university students who are younger people, more open to change just by demographic, and a larger number of evangelists by gift by demographic, means that, like a ministry like AFES and other parachurches has a large chunk of people, you know, as does something like Geneva Push with the church planters. You know, there's you know, often younger profile congregations, often more evangelist leaders. Yeah, there's definitely that. However, AFES in its current form is, you know, 30 plus years old. And so it's, you know, I mean, years ago now, Andrew Reid, the General Secretary who led to a lot of change to create modern AFES, he spoke years ago about the risk that we'd lead into middle age. And so there is that too. There are traditions and liturgies now within AFES around lunchtime Bible talks or August missions or mid-year conferences that must be 5 days and must be, you know, or whatever it is. Do you know what I mean? Like, so we, you know, even mission organizations, it might take longer and they might not calcify quite so much, maybe, but they can get
I've been struck by that as a church pastor, Mikey, watching in on AFES in Sydney, because we got a load of uni students at our church, and it seemed like we have to have an MYC, and it has to have 40 hours of content in a week online, and then suddenly the Sunday at the end of that, none of our a lot of our uni students weren't at church because they were just so frazzled by that much time. Now, I wouldn't miss MYC for anything if I was running a uni ministry, so it's not a criticism of anyone. But it's interesting that, and I did wonder about that. I wondered what's driving that, and is it just, well, MYC is so important, we must run an MYC.
Yep.
Or has there been bottom up thinking?
And just like with churches, you have the elder or the former minister who has this oracular legacy. Leaders like Andrew Reid, I mentioned, or Philip Jensen, something they might have said in a conference in 1993 has oracular weight. You know, if they said, "Oh, you must never let go of this because that's what leads to liberalism," or something, that now is like written in stone. You know what I mean? Andrew Reid said.
There is also the sense that Rory is one response where he's excited about this disruption, come up with a load of opportunities. There are a whole bunch of other leaders for whom change is not the natural preference, and whom actually want to move towards the familiar. It's easy to recreate. It's easy to just do the little change, not the big change. So how do we speak to the smaller church with the traditional eldership or the traditional parish council, who for this just want you as a leader to roll out church exactly the same way, and for the minister who's also a solo pastor, doesn't have a team around him to implement these fantastical ideas that the online world has brought out. What's the opportunity for them?
I think sorry, Phil. Yeah.
No, I just want to make just something on something Mikey or Rory said before that leads into this is, don't discount the fact that people are wanting a less cluttered life out of this as well. So there is an opportunity even in the church resistant to change, that yes, there's some people who are passionate about running their ministry that you're thinking you might want to shut or that sort of thing. But I think there is an openness also that has a negative side, that people might say, well, I'm not coming to a Bible study anymore. I've quite enjoyed nights at home in my pajamas when I get home from work, whatever it is. But
it's always the pajamas. That's the big thing.
But on a positive side, there is that opportunity. There is that reality that can be used for good, which is, well, hang on, you realised how frazzled you were running all those extra structures we used to have. Let's be a less structured, more intentional church coming out of that. But that takes leadership and so forth. But yeah,
there's a great book that is, I mean, it's American how-to-y and kind of evidence proves everything book, but a little book called Simple Church by Eric Geiger and Tom Rayner. That would be a really helpful little handbook, I reckon, because it more or less kind of goes through a lot of the stuff Rich Australia talks about too, in terms of having focus and movement and these kinds of things. And so that could be a really useful workbook. You know, you skip over the bad use of the Bible and the proving everything with stats, and the basic sort of line of it, I think, is quite good. So something like that, I guess, would be maybe one bit of advice, because as Phil says, actually, you could sell this not as some new program for the pushy, driving minister, but actually a way to get more simplicity and clarity and so on in what we do. And the other thing I'd just say is time is on your side. And and you can talk about that personally, pastorally, you know, in terms of like just sensitivity to people, as well as, if you like, strategically, to say we still don't know a lot. There's a lot we don't know. There's a lot we're not sure on. There's a lot of people who are still up and down. And actually, maybe you could even say, oh, I'm not up for it yet. There's about 3 ways that you can slow down your eldership, your parish council, your staff member, to buy a bit more time to go a bit more simple, clear, and so on.
I think absolutely.
Sorry, Rory. No, sorry.
Well,
this is the perils of Zoom meetings. I mean, small change is good change. You know what I mean? So you may have this grand plan, but there's small changes you can make and so on. But the other thing is, and this is picking up on Mikey's point, you can work with them to what you start up first. And what you start up first, and then you've actually got a long time then, and it might be we just, over a longer period, people realise we don't need that extra thing we used to have, and so forth. It's in a different way. I remember when I was a young Christian and the minister applied in an Anglican church, had to apply to move pews and all that sort of thing. And he applied to move the choir pews out of the church building so that we could have a drum kit up the front of church, you know, back in 1992. And everyone complained. But then he applied to do it for 3 months into the hall to give it a trial, and everyone said, well, that's reasonable. And as far as I'm aware, the
trial never stopped.
The choir pews have never returned, and so forth. And in the same way here, well, let's go for 3 months in this less complex way, because we can only do so much. And then that actually gives time to have those conversations and to see, and for people to see, actually, we didn't need X, Y, and Z.
Which helps us. I mean, we'll be starting up small group structures. Hopefully we'll be starting up new, you know, there's been new opportunities for mission, which I think have meant being able to actually have a mission plan for a lot of churches that they didn't have before in place. So this sort of transition back to gathering physically allows us to think more intentionally about our small group structures, about our evangelistic, planning and implementation in a way that the 3-month trial of the choir pews, I don't think would have given us, you know, it would have been too slow to do some of those things. Rory?
Well, I do think that's right. On the way back in, the maths we're using, rightly or wrongly, and time will tell, is that there's a kind of basically a year, 12 months, or at least the rest of this year back into whatever the future looks like, and we're trying to frame everything here in. So we've decided that we're going to start meeting again on the 28th of June, and we've got a 6-week period after which we review, because those 6 weeks will be very administrative. Like a lot of volunteer time will be taken writing down people's names and contact details and so on. And I don't think we'll be able to do live music. Maybe we're just working all that out. And I think we just need to frame these as let's do this for 6 weeks, pause, review, next 6 weeks, pause, review. And I think in smaller churches, that is a great opportunity. I imagine my sense is that for smaller churches, in some ways, the pandemic was harder, because it's just, if you're kind of a one-person operation, it's just hard to suddenly leap into life with audio visual and podcasting and so on. But conversely, I think those smaller churches, especially those more legacy type churches, not small because they were planted 5 weeks ago, but old small churches, have survived a lot of stuff, and they'll be there because they're survivors. And often the challenge in a church like that is not survival, because that's what they've proved they can do, but you have that what some of the literature calls the aristocratic class, that group of people who are protecting the congregation and protecting the traditions and so on. I wonder if there's a creative way of pivoting that energy, which at its worst says no to any change, but at its best is a pastoral instinct to defend the flock. And if you can enlist that instinct and say, hey guys, we're going to start again, but we're not going to have music, and it'll be much more like Mikey was saying, a kind of chapel experience, a 10-minute devotion, a kind of awkward no tea and coffee experience or whatever. And the reason that we're doing this is because in our group of 60 people, a good 20% are experiencing very strong anxiety about this return. And we're wanting to shepherd this group in. And there may be an opportunity there to repivot that energy that is sometimes protecting structures to be oriented towards pastoral care for the people.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Understanding and identifying those groups. So Mikey's talked about Simple Church is a great book to be thinking into this. Tom Rainer's book, Who Changed My Pulpit, I think is another book to sort of start thinking through who are those change stoppers or those change blockers, and how can we utilize them well. I am thinking you've already put in that evaluative sequence, Rory, into your planning process. So we're going to start, but in 6 weeks' time we're going to stop, reevaluate. That's one of the things I don't think churches do very well. That is, think about once something's happened, actually think into, and did it achieve the outcomes that we sought? Has it actually met the goal of what we're trying to achieve? Is it too soon? As you say, it's going to be 12 months before we sort of come out of this and kind of recalibrate and have a new normal. Is it too soon to be sort of working things out categorically? Like how soon do you think you can say this is what we're going to be doing at Providence, or this is what we're going to be doing at St George North?
Yeah, I mean, I reckon that. I think my sense is that we're too soon. I think there's some forecasting where I've got some hunches and intuitions about how things might look in 12 months. But we're going, if you've seen some of those graphs on the internet, we're coming out of the honeymoon. We're heading into a situation where there's lots of potential for disillusionment, and no one, I remember our first Sunday online, it was kind of awful objectively, but subjectively incredibly well received. It was, it was bad audio, it was bad thing. Our stuff got a lot better quite quickly, but the first Sunday was terrible. But all these texts like that was so great because it was just, there were no expectations, and where we're getting back into a point. And if you don't build in those do, stop, evaluate, and then add in something else or repivot or whatever, you're just inviting the comparison that how come church this Sunday wasn't like church 4 months ago, or how come this ministry wasn't like that? Whereas if I think we do need to take that opportunity to not invite the comparisons and to say this is different and will be different for quite some time. I don't know how you think about that, Phil.
Yeah, I actually think the way in has given us a template for the way out. Where I don't know about others, but where we just had to switch into real constant evaluation planning of everything, and then you do that for a week, and then it'd be redundant the following week, so you do it the next week.
Terrible.
I've joked a couple of times how we have all these individual serves of biscuits and chips sitting up at the church, and frankly, I've been the only person eating them for the last 3 months.
Delicious.
We bought them on the way in, and I think that is the lesson on the way out.
It was cute, wasn't it? We thought we'd do things, didn't we?
We had all these plans.
We'll still do that. It'll be all right.
Yeah.
But as you said, Phil, you spent a long amount of time working out how to serve food for kids, and then within a week
we did it for a week. Yeah, and that was that's part of a big.
And there are things that we know could come, and it doesn't feel like they're going. I mean, you mentioned like the night of the long knives, and who would have thought that we would have had a Second World War and that Germany would have transformed as it did in the 30s and 40s. And I was actually just reading it. I was reading this the other day, Uncle Carl, and at one point, it's just after World War II, and he goes, "The Nazis were really bad, but Stalinists aren't that bad." In 1946,
we were still sort of together then. Yeah.
Well, you just didn't know, and we kind of know there could be all sorts of massive financial stuff that just hasn't hit us yet. It's going to hit the planet, and geopolitics reshuffling that's going to hit the planet for the next, mental health issues and relational issues. So there's actually these kind of asteroids still coming, to the planet, that it doesn't feel like it because it's a nice day outside, and we can now go to a cafe, and and so that's yet another warning. We don't want to expend so much energy for September 2020 that we're not ready for like massive changes still waiting for September 2022, you know.
So Phil, is the learning to not be so, you know, planned? Is that
no,
to not do all the hard work, or is it just to be really flexible?
I think there's a real skill in leadership in this, and it's a skill always. In planning, you've got to have strategy and function, you know, and functionality. And one of the things I learned over the years is you can't have a strategy meeting every week. You've got to, and some people want to have a strategy discussion every week, you know, and so on. But sometimes you've got to do your strategy, and then you've got to say, now let's implement, and let's just for 3 months. But then some people only ever do the practical stuff and never get to doing the strategy. And I think what the in and the out of this is saying we've got to do a lot more strategic thinking regularly than we would normally. So a once a year planning conference and then the rest of the year is not enough now.
Those were the days.
You know, but but you've got to be careful that you don't get into a weekly strategy meeting where you're never actually doing the practical. And I'm learning as I go in this, like everyone else, you know. So what I'm trying to do anyway is constantly doing the strategy and breaking it down. A bit like I said before, having that part on the end of the staff meeting agenda for thinking big. But here, you've got to evaluate every month. So no use saying, oh, now this is what we're doing and it's online. You're just going to keep having the strategy question as things change. And that's exhausting, but it's what we've got to do. Yeah.
And I think there's a proper conservatism in this, which is, I think, you know, you can't predict things, but I think on average you want to rebuild incrementally, because it's harder and more dispiriting for people to go to, you know, back to normal as quickly as possible, and then suddenly there's a second. You know, there's a second spike in cases, or there's an economic crisis that comes about, and you have to go, you know, 5 steps forward and then 3 steps back, or whatever. And I think you're much better having that kind of 6 weeks, 3 months, and then thinking, oh, things aren't bad. We can bring back in live singing. We can bring back in whatever, rather than that. You know, if you read some of the stuff on crisis management, so after a tsunami in 2004, I read a bit about that. And in Christchurch, there's often after that honeymoon period of all coming together and dealing with the acute cases, which are very satisfying, because you suddenly, you bind up a broken leg and it's better, and you rebuild a thing. And then a second, you know, another tremor comes along, or the chronic cases start to take over from the acute cases, and they're much more dispiriting. And so you need to build with those clear markers, where much better to slowly pull something on and say to the keen people, okay, let's see 6 weeks from now whether that's the time to do that, rather than go out all guns blazing and then have that depressing kind of retreat.
Mm-hmm. I think that's helpful. In your planning map, there's a sense to which it's got to get grayer and grayer the longer it goes on.
Yeah.
You've still got to plan for it. You know, so you've got to plan hard for the next 6 weeks, you know, and then you've got to have ideas for beyond that, but hold them, which is theologically what we believe, isn't it? Yeah. That we are not the masters of the future.
Yes.
God is.
Can I push into your leadership? How's disruption changed your leadership style, or what has it thrown up for you in terms of sort of self-awareness, more understanding about how you lead your team, how you lead generally? Maybe Mikey, do you want to kick us off?
I mean, I think it's a kind of leadership. On one level, it's very hard, very stressful, very unpleasant. On another level, I think this is a test of a certain kind of bedrock of leadership based around character and communication and all that kind of stuff. So in one level, I feel like it's in a strange way easy, in a sense that you've got to do the planning, you've got to do the evaluating, you've got to do the communicating, you've got to love people. and then that's all you can do. And then it's like you don't know what the future holds. And I think it's important, especially, like, not every disruption is an opportunity straight away. You know, the blood of the martyrs isn't always the seed of the church straight away. It often can suffocate the church for a long time. And in the same way, it's okay to say, actually, the kind of disruption we're currently in, like, I'm hearing some good stories. Some of them I'm a bit skeptical of. It's largely bad for the cause of the gospel right now. It's harder to do ministry and to do evangelism. And I'm really not convinced a lot of the online church visitors are listening that deeply. Some of them are, praise God. He can convert people through Gideon's Bibles, but online church broadcasts to strangers is a bit like Gideon Bibles in hotel rooms. And so in a sense, we just got to go, like, we are where we are. So now we love our people, preach the word, we pray, we give clear communication, and then we look after ourselves, because it's going to go on for months. So I guess that in the middle of it all, I guess it's given me confidence in those central means of grace as they apply to Christian leadership. And I've rested a lot in that. And that helps me feel like I'll be in a place to continue to lead in the future. I feel a lot better than if I was having to sort of maximize right this instant in some other way. Yeah. So changing mode. Yeah.
To some degree, I this may be unhelpful for some, but I actually think leadership over this period is really easy. I think it's easy to be a leader in a crisis, assuming you're reasonably competent. It's why ScoMo's approval ratings are going up. Gladys' approval ratings in New South Wales. I don't know the name of the Tasmanian or Western Australian premiers, but I'm sure their approval ratings are going well. Unless you really make a mess of it, people show you great forgiveness and so forth. And in a way, I think for ministers, actually, yes, it's hard getting the things up and running and the online stuff and so forth, but it's all task leadership. It's where you can tick a box, which is so different to the normal, weirdly grey world we in ministry often live in, where KPIs, you know, who knows whether that person has responded positively to the gospel? Who knows whether that 2 hours spent reading the word with that person is going to bear fruit? And so
I'm just going to kill this. I'm blind with the sunlight getting in my eyes. Keep going.
But I do sometimes think, I hope out of this we don't become too task focused in our leadership. We've got to be aware that was for a time, but leadership is people and so forth going forward. So that's one thing about leadership. I think sometimes news of how hard it is can be overrated. A bit like Mikey, I agree with Mikey that I love accentuating the positives and minimizing the negatives and all that sort of stuff. And we should do that in this time. It's great to rejoice that people are watching online material and so forth. But it is the Gideon's Bible.
Or you could say the family coming to the baptism or the wedding or the funeral. Yeah. Like they're coming because it's nice, Celebrate
it, and God's word might have an impact.
I pray so.
But you wouldn't do it as your tactic going forward.
No.
Yeah. Look, I totally agree with that. And I mean, I think I'm on record somewhere as saying that, like, any idiot can lead into a crisis. And I think you've got to be careful, because with almost all national, nation leaders, their approval ratings have been almost independent of their politics and the way people voted or something. And you can accrue to yourself, think, hey, actually, I'm a pretty great leader. But actually, it's one of the only times that people are actively looking for leadership is during a crisis. And if you're the guy standing there with the leadership title, and I think it is one of those times again, and I think maybe especially on the way out, where character and conviction do really come to the fore, that you can't lead into uncertainty just with all the tricks that you've got in the back of your pocket about how to manage change and to cast a vision and stuff like that. I think it really is I feel very convicted that pastoring my team, being someone who keeps their word, who has got a non-showy, proper piety, devotional life, and caring for people, that I think that will matter more the tricks in the magician's toolbox, to mix a metaphor.
And to some degree, there it's, and that's with a lot of this whole time. I think there's a sense to which you reap what you've sowed for however many years before. If people, I really feel for guys who haven't had the opportunity to put runs on the board before this, guys who've started just before this crisis, and that's real hard leadership, where there's a sense to which the people at St George North, if I get it wrong, will forgive me because of 17 years of accrued relational capital and trust. That's not the case for guys fresh into a new church in this. So they're the people I think where it is a tough time for leadership. Yeah.
So guys, I want to round it out. What's the thing that you want to say to church leaders around Australia about disruption? And maybe we can start with you, Mikey. Finish with you, Phil.
The thing, I don't know, listen to the last 50 minutes. It's not over, is a thing. So take your time, do it out of faith and godliness, and I guess be looking to honour God and be useful for the kingdom and lead people to be useful for the kingdom over that long timeline. Is that a good summary? I don't know.
Yeah, that's great. That's excellent. Rory?
I just go back to that previous metaphor that you've had everything, you've had this decluttering moment, and just to be very deliberate about what you bring back in, one by one, check by check, incrementally, and to be very deliberate in your own devotional life, care. I think two things in leadership really are judgment and interest. And interest, that is interest in other people, looks a lot like love. To actually care for the people around you, and to, I think caring for the people in your community over these next few months will not only is the right thing to do, but it'll build you capital for the next decade.
Phil.
I think both those answers have been excellent, and I'm probably only going to reiterate what they said. But I think, yes, think strategically. Yes, see the opportunities, all those sort of things. But remember, your job is to love the people, both those within the flock and those outside the flock, and let that drive you. So don't just forget that in the end, this business of ministry is quite simple. There is the word, there is prayer, there is fellowship, and your strategy should be about bringing those things to bear on these people who God has given you to care for. Yeah, that'd be what I'd say. Yeah.
Right. Well, appreciate you spending the time talking about disruption and the opportunities it gives the church in Australia. Thanks, guys.